Hello. I've got the gospel lesson for the 15th Sunday of Pentecost in front of me. And it's a troubling passage for a lot of folks. It's from Mark chapter 7, verses 24 to 37. Jesus has fed the 5,000. He's done his ministry in the northern coast of the Sea of Galilee. And now he's moving out into Gentile territories, trying to find a place to rest. The crowds are just kind of surrounding him and making life hectic for him. So he's trying to find some peace, and so he's going into Gentile territory, seeking some rest, but it doesn't work. So from Capernaum area, from there, Jesus, set out and went away to the region of Tyre. That's along the Mediterranean Sea coast, predominantly Gentile territory. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there. He's looking for a break. Yet he could not escape notice, not even there. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him. And she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, of Syrophoenician origin. So it's telling us twice, definitely, this is a Gentile woman. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, and this is the troubling part, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." Yikes. Calling this woman a dog? And that's kind of showing some bias that Jews have toward Gentiles. They can use a derogatory term that sounds like the word in Greek for Gentile, but it's dogs. And it's not nice. So Jesus says, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." So Jesus is saying primarily his ministry is for Israel, the Jews. At least start there first. Now, so let the children be fed first, the Jewish children, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. And the word for dogs means a pet dog. It's not just some mangy dog out there running around. It's a pet. So imagine children at the table, the scraps drop on the floor and the dogs quickly grab them up. And sometimes the children give them food intentionally, even adults, because they're pets. So let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. But she answered him, "Sir," or Lord, "even the dogs under the table eat the children's scraps." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. Then he returned from the region of Tyre and went by way of Sidon toward the Sea of Galilee in the region of the Decapolis. Decapolis, another Gentile region, predominantly Gentile. A few Jews live there. They brought to him a deaf man who had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to lay his hand on him. He took him aside in private away from the crowd, put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Then looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, "Ephphatha," that is, be opened. And immediately his ears were opened, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. Then Jesus ordered them to tell no one, but the more he ordered them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. They were astounded beyond measure, saying, "He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak." So if you notice, people who are deaf, they can't hear how words are enunciated and spoken, and they don't sound like those of us who can hear, as they don't know how the words sound and they have trouble articulating. So He finally gets his hearing back and he can speak clearly. That's good. Now let's get back to that difficult part. Is Jesus a bigot? This is a difficult passage, and it's tempting to avoid it and make the text say what we want it to say, but that's not responsible interpretation. That's forcing the text. And when we do that, we get into trouble. The Bible can speak for itself. Mostly we just try to get out of its way and let it speak and do the hard work of interpreting the proper interpretation, or there are many proper interpretations, but some are not, particularly if we force the text and ignore these difficult verses. Now think about it. The first century Christian experience was rife with conflict and polarization. We live in a highly polarized world today. Jews and Gentiles were at odds with each other, and the Jews who followed Jesus were at odds with people within their own Jewish heritage. There's a civil war going on from 66 to 70 A.D., the Bar Kokhba rebellion. And a would-be Messiah, different kind of Messiah than Jesus, is creating a civil war. Now, mind you, Jesus finishes his ministry around 33 A.D., but this has been brewing a long time. The native Jewish people in Israel resent Roman occupation. Who wouldn't? It's sometimes very brutal. So it's a very conflicted context that Jesus is living in and addressing. Now this Gentile Syrophoenician woman is desperate for help. Her daughter has a demon. Like any normal mother, she'd be desperate for help. And so she hears about this Jewish prophet, Messiah, healer, and she even wants to try a person like this. So they have this conversation when she begs for help from Jesus, and he says, the thing about scraps from the dogs, from the table, even feeding the dogs, a reference to this Jewish-Gentile divide. But she's desperate for help, and she agrees that the crumbs from a Jewish table are better than what she knows in paganism, or she hopes so at least. Apparently she's noticing that Jesus is the bread of heaven, perhaps, even though she's a Gentile pagan. Now, think about paganism for a while. Paganism is making a comeback, and paganism is really a celebration of the natural necessity, the natural order. So when in recent years, recent decades, we seem to be in a post-Christian era where the biblical Christianity has been in decline, well, it's revealing what has always been. So it's kind of, instead of saying post-Christian, it's reverting back to pre-Christian, because paganism has been around even before Christianity shows up. And paganism brackets out the transcendent God of creation and only looks within the pantheism of the created order. That is different than the God of Israel. The God of Israel is a creator God who is God that stands outside of nature and creates all of nature, but is still immanent and available in personal relationship within human history, with individuals and nations. Pagans couldn't understand this. Their gods were as capricious as the weather. And there were gods of the weather, gods of war, gods of commerce, gods of this, gods of that. So those who worship the gods of paganism wish to sacrifice to their gods in order to gain favor with those pagan gods, so they can conduct business, have a very fertile field or flock. And so they need to court these gods with proper sacrifice. But these gods are typically very capricious. Can you control the weather? It's like I say, everybody talks about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. Maybe we should make a proper sacrifice to the god of thunder, Odin or Baal or Thor, whoever. Now, you can't gain favor with the God of Israel by sacrificing. And that comes across in Scripture several times. Essentially, can you buy my favor with all these sacrifices that you have made? No. The proper sacrifice is proper behavior and a right heart. That's the kind of sacrifice that the God of Israel wants. A loving relationship that we choose. Pagans can be brutal with their sacrifices. There have been human sacrifice and other awful sacrifices to gain the favor of the pagan gods, the nature gods. The nature gods of paganism have been dealt with already in the Exodus from Egypt. Those 10 plagues before the people are released from bondage in Egypt are all about discrediting the nature gods of Egypt. And so these gods are also gods that tend to enslave people. They really aren't gods, they're forces of nature. So the God that we choose to follow, whatever God that is reflected in the kind of life that we lead. Following the Creator God of Israel, who made us and made our world, satisfies our souls and makes sense of the world. And it makes sense of our moral order. So, when we hear the commandments, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of bondage in Egypt. Therefore, follow these rules and you'll do well. So, unless there is a God, all morality is just opinion and belief. It's all relative, according to the person. You can say, I believe murder is wrong, but how do you know murder is wrong? Well, when we believe in the God of creation, like Israel does, like Christians do, well, then with this God, it's objectively true and not relative, that murder is wrong always, everywhere, for all time. Without God, right and wrong are just personal beliefs, opinions. So when other gods are worshipped, bad things result. Worshipping other gods, false gods, creates a moral relativism where eventually, sometimes very quickly, awful things are justified, like murder and stealing, for the greater good, they think. Then you can say, in my opinion, murder is okay in these particular circumstances when aimed at those particular people. Nazism eventually came up with the claim that it was okay, it was even good to murder Jews and many other types of people who were not Aryan, for example. And there have been other things that have happened in that way. So, given the context of the turmoil of Mark's gospel that he is addressing in the 1st century A.D., Jesus offers a superior alternative to what this pagan woman knows. Isn't it possible that Jesus is not really reflecting the typical bias that Jews have toward Gentiles and vice versa? Couldn't he be acknowledging the bigotry and the tension that already is present in this context? Saying, notice this, I notice this, don't you? You call us dogs, we call you dogs. Maybe we can get past that. So you really are coming to me? You're really serious? So this is a very polarizing, conflicted time, like it is in Afghanistan right now and all over the world. maybe Jesus is showing us a better way to deal with our difficulties with each other. First, by acknowledging this bias and this bigotry. And then notice that Jesus very quickly moves to heal her daughter. There's no argument. He just does it. She persists. Sir, Lord. She's addressing him as Sir, Lord. At this point in Mark's gospel, not even Jesus' own disciples address him like that. Not yet. In Mark's gospel, the first creatures who realize who Jesus really is are demons. And soon after that, this Gentile, this woman. So, not even Jesus' own disciples at this point recognize Jesus for who he really is. They don't talk to him like that, not yet anyway. And at the end of the gospel, while Jesus is being crucified, the Gentile Roman centurion in charge of Jesus' crucifixion confesses, this man truly is the Son of God. In Mark's gospel, it's the outsiders who recognize Jesus first. In the middle of this polarizing, deadly conflict that Mark's first audience hears this gospel in. So Mark is reaching across all kinds of boundaries and barriers in this gospel. And in it, he shows Jesus reaching out to all kinds of sinners, tax collectors, prostitutes, lepers, Gentiles, and people within his own faith within a divided Judaism. The Syrophoenician Gentile woman is persistent in her prayer and finds healing. She's persistent. Following the healing of the Syrophoenician woman's daughter is the healing of the deaf man with a speech impediment. And Jesus heals him, saying, Ephatha, that is, be opened. It reminds those of us who follow Jesus to find the words, the understanding, and the speech to be Jesus' followers in order to help heal a divided world. Good luck with that. Keep praying. Keep the faith. Amen.